Once I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will always have a live chat on the first Friday of the month at 8 p.m. So please subscribe, click on the bell, and let's get 1,000 subscribers very soon. Gudde Moien, and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Japan was divided. Japan capitulated on the 15th of August 1945 and signed their surrender on the 2nd of September 1945. During this time it was the US that occupied all of Japan proper and some former territories as well. The USSR got North Korea, or the northern part of Korea, as occupation zone, while the southern part was occupied by the US. Of course, there were also places like Taiwan, but we will not discuss about Taiwan or other places like this as they are fairly complicated. Smaller military outposts in the Pacific controlled by Japan did not capitulate because they had no communication with the outside world. Some soldiers even held their position until the 70s. A very important thing that was concluded since the beginning of the peace negotiation was that Japan would still be a monarchy. The emperor was viewed as a living god, and taking him away would cause for a lot of unrest among the Japanese. If this would change, then having a communist Japan would not be very possible, as it would give the Japanese an initiative to unite against a common foe or against all the outsiders. The emperor needs to be there, perhaps not really in power or charge, but just at least as a representative figure of Japan, as it is in our timeline. A few key points that would favor a Soviet occupation of Japan are the following. The Kuril Islands, which are still nowadays a problem between Russia and Japan. The fact that Japan occupied a good chunk of Sakhalin way before. Stalin's ambitions, of course, because in general it was him who, he made a lot of border changes. It is because of him that Kaliningrad exists in the first place. So I would actually see Stalin as a very ambitious person who would also like to occupy parts of Japan. Japan being on the losing side and not having much leverage to negotiate. Since Japan is very far from the US, there is a possibility that the US could see maybe an advantage to have also the Soviets on board as an occupying power. And there was already a huge communist party in Japan, and nowadays it is still a very big communist party and one of the biggest actually in the world. So, what if Japan was divided? The theory would be that the emperor would perhaps hold a different type of speech and use more direct words instead of saying that the war was not in a favorable way or it would not go to their direction. So he could say something more like we are about to lose or we are at the bad side, etc., taking away some of his prestige and making people realize that he's just a human being who makes mistakes, and thus, more people will not really trust him anymore. This will not change much, but at least it will disunite the Japanese a little bit further, and some people might even join the Communist Party just because of that. In 1945, the Communist Party was legalized in OTL throughout Japan, so if the Soviets were on board, well, the Communist Party would actually make more gains in the elections. They would have a bigger support from the outside, and they could convert this bigger support of the outside into bigger support inside. Already in 1949 the party won 10% in all of Japan, and this is in OTL, of course. And if we give at least the north to the Soviets and get some more communists after the speech of the emperor, the Communist Party could effectively at least get maybe, let's say, 30% of the votes in the Soviet occupied zone. And another POD would be that in one way or another the Americans would for real see the Soviets and the Soviets occupying the Japanese islands as an advantage, just for the mere fact that Japan is so far away, and that they would be afraid that the Japanese could somehow rebel now that there is some type of disunity because of the emperor, and maybe also many other facts that would be happening around Japan and in Japan. Gerrymandering and manipulations would happen, and the salami tactic similar to Eastern Europe would be applied. Other parties would exist and just become part of a bloc or national front that would recognize the leadership of the Communist Party, and they would just be some type of servants and just make this democracy as some type of plaything. Nothing else would happen with democracy, at least in northern Japan. Also, the south of Japan would support the Communist Party more, and this is because Stalin insisted that the Japanese Communist Party should pursue a more militant and even violent actions, and this would further destabilize the south and perhaps again create more members or voters, or at least cause problems in all of Japan. Afterwards, around the 50s, when the Japanese states would be successfully established, we would have the People's Republic of Japan and the State of Japan, and they would not share the same fate as Korea. Probably the Japanese would be more nervous in the years of the Korean War, and they would get more violent, but they would not consider becoming an ally or somehow sympathize with the Koreans. The thing is, even though they are communist or anti-communist, the Japanese mentality is very different in that regards, and they would rather fight the Koreans or the Americans or the Soviets than to fight amongst themselves. Japanese soldiers would not only participate for real in the war, except if they would be forced by the occupying powers to do so, and in there I just see the US doing that to the state of Japan when they would ask them to send them some soldiers, but it would be a very unpopular thing, and the US would really lose a lot of popularity in there. So the Soviets, they would see this Korean War as, again, just the own mistake of Kim Il-sung, and the Chinese would intervene because the Chinese and the Koreans, they both have a different type of relation and they can like each other, whereas with Japan this would not really happen. Other aspect is that due to terrorism and sabotage that would still happen, at least in the state of Japan or southern Japan, just like in OTL, it would make that there would be a huge pretext to actually forbid and outlaw the Japanese Communist Party, and they would then anyways have no votes anymore, and well, of course, we would have something similar as in Western Germany or also like in South Korea, but then again it would be something on a secondary surface, because after all they are Japanese, and thus they would still rather tolerate each other than, you know, go for war with the Koreans. But then again, because of the US presence and because of the political division, it would be very logical for the state of Japan to outlaw the Japanese Communist Party, because with the acts of terrorism they would make a lot of trouble and also make that harmony doesn't exist anymore within the Japanese society. In OTL, the Sino-Soviet split was not commented by the Japanese Communist Party. However, in this timeline, the Japanese Communist Party would rather be with the Soviets and someone like Nikita Khrushchev than with the Chinese Mao, who had a very negative opinion about the Japanese. The People's Republic of Japan would thus never really be a strong ally of the PRC or North Korea. They would rather have a position somewhat similar to Ceausescu's Romania. They too would be afraid that the Soviets would have too much control over them, and thus a leader like Kenji Miyamoto would be really popular within the People's Republic of Japan. Even the state of Japan and the PRG could evolve rather good relationships because of this, but they would of course never have a really good relationship in that sense that it would blossom, because the US and the USSR, they would then come in and try to somehow block it in one way or another. There's a good example that I can give you right now on why the People's Republic of Japan would be similar to Ceausescu's Romania, at least in the political context. Miyamoto, just like Ceausescu, condemned the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. Ceausescu did so in order to seem independent from the Soviets. The Romanian conductor, as he liked to call himself, was always afraid that the Soviets would not stop with Czechoslovakia, but they would do then the same to Romania, for instance. And at the same time, he could appeal to his own people, fostering some type of nationalistic sentiment, which were still very important within Romania. This could fit perfectly for Japan as well. Of course, we will have some minor adoptions, and this would be made, of course, by Kenji Miyamoto, but the main points of Ceausescu in this regards could also be applied in the People's Republic of Japan. The economies of both Japans would be very different, and in the 60s and 70s these differences would become very obvious nonetheless. Hokkaido and North Japan, they still have a lot of forests, and it consists more than 1/4 of Japan's total arable land. Timber production, marine products, as well as aquaculture are very important in Hokkaido. Coal mining too would consist a really big asset. This would have a big impact on South Japan, or the state of Japan. The diet could change somewhat and become more Americanized, as they would need to import food from their ally. Or in another way, they could actually not change much of the diet, but they could agree to import food of the People's Republic of Japan and form a very good and important economic relationship. It could mean that the People's Republic of Japan would not be really behind in technology, as the state of Japan, in order to somehow trade with the People's Republic of Japan, would then give maybe something in automobile industry or something of the computers or other important technological stuff, and which again could benefit the USSR and the whole of the Eastern Bloc, for instance. However, the People's Republic of Japan would have way less people to work with and still have many more people who would escape to the south. So the south, they might maybe lose some communist sympathizers after the ban of the Japanese Communist Party, but that would probably be it. The north would thus not only lose people in great numbers, but also experts, and face some type of a brain drain, but not really the same type of a brain drain as the German Democratic Republic. Because while they would have many Japanese leaving, many experts leaving the north to the south, the education system would still be regarded as very important. A lot of money would be poured into, and maybe if for some reason the northern part of Japan would spend more money, state money, in the education system, it could even be a little bit better than the education system of the state of Japan, because this mentality that is prevalent in Japan and also in other parts of Asia would push students to get excellent results. And then again, the Soviets, they could remark this, and then they would actually ask the People's Republic of Japan to send some of their experts, not only in Russia, but also in many other parts, like in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, or Mongolia, for instance. And this would mean that many of these experts would be very tired and overworked, and thus it would create again a very typical problem that exists within Japan, and maybe they would try to go and flee to the south, but it's only one of many things that would probably happen. Both Japans would favor nuclear energy, and both Japans would have an official army and not mention much about peace. OTL Japan officially doesn't have an army, although they have a militarized police force, and the idea of peace is still very important in OTL Japan, but then again, the mentality in that regards of peace and army would be very different within the People's Republic of Japan and also the state of Japan. So both Japans would be in that regards very different of OTL Japan. And I'm actually pretty sure that once the USSR collapses, both Japans would try to unite as fast as possible. Of course, there would be some problems, there would be some things that they would need to overcome, but I think at the end the Japanese would see the split of their country as a fatal mistake, which could at this moment be undone after many decades. The Communist Party would most likely still have a reform and still have some support in the north. I don't think that the Japanese would somehow try to work on their history that they had. I mean, if we look at it in OTL, the denazification, for instance, in Germany was something very unique, while in Japan, even nowadays, genocides are not really, they are just forgotten or people don't talk about it. And so I think that the communist past of northern Japan would also just be, overlooked in a way. And that's why the Communist Party then could successfully reform. They could still maintain a good support because they replaced the emperor in one way or another as an authority, and many, especially younger Japanese in that time, looked not to the emperor but more to the Communist Party. The economic transition in the former People's Republic of Japan would not be so harsh because South Japanese companies could then move there. They would still have the same type of people, the same type of language spoken, the same mentality about work. Work ethic would be the same. There would be many new good jobs which the northern Japanese would really like to have, and they would really put a focus on getting it. But the wages would be a bit lower, but still it would give the benefit that South Japan and Japan as a whole would rely less on foreign imports, at least in food. And I think that just like this, the lost decade would not happen at all, or would just be a minor correction, economically speaking, and maybe Japan would be in the same position as it is today. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Althistory.